वेलकम बैक टू माय ऑफिशियल यूट्यूब चैनल। दिस इज गौरव यान एंड वेलकम बैक टू द शो। तो आज शो थोड़ा सा इंटरेस्टिंग है। आज हमारे साथ हैं चारबल, जो ऑस्ट्रेलिया से आए हुए हैं। ठीक है, आज उनसे उनका पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू लेंगे क्रिकेट ऑस्ट्रेलिया से रिलेटेड, और जो अभी वर्ल्ड टेस्ट चैंपियनशिप फाइनल है उस पे भी उनका टेक लेंगे। तो मोस्टली आज जो डिस्कशन होगा ना हमारा, वो क्रिकेट ऑस्ट्रेलिया से ही होगा। सो स्वागत करते हैं। मेरे साथ क्रिकेट गाय भी हैं, तो वो भी थोड़ा सा कन्वर्सेशन को आगे बढ़ाएंगे, मेरी हेल्प करेंगे थोड़ा, और डिस्कशन को आगे बढ़ाएंगे। तो सबसे पहले स्वागत करते हैं क्रिकेट गाय का। एंड चार्वल, वेलकम
Thank you.
बैक टू माय शो मेट। हाउ आर यू?
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me. I'm well. How are you?
Yeah,
Sorry,
we can
I
hear
didn't
you.
hear
Yeah,
you
yeah,
properly, mate.
Can you hear me now?
yeah.
Yeah, right now. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. I was
So
just
how are
saying
you,
thank
mate?
you for inviting me, and yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm also good. So what is the situation in Australia of COVID right now?
Sydney is fine. No cases at the moment, but in Victoria, they're currently in lockdown. So the state below New South Wales, where Sydney is located, in Melbourne, there's a lockdown at the moment there because of a COVID outbreak over the last week or so. So everywhere else in Australia is pretty good, but it's Melbourne at the moment that's in lockdown. How about
Okay,
you
cricket guy,
guys
you want to
in
ask
India?
anything more? Yeah, we are facing a very difficult phase. We are going through a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
difficult phase
Yeah.
right now. So we are little bit control right now. The cases are going down day by day. So we are in control. I hope we will get a fine after 2 or 3 months. So that's the
That's
situation right
great.
now. Cricket guy, you want to ask anything more from Chawal?
Yeah, I mean, very excited for this interview with Charbel, and the situation here is going down. But it's not that if we have 150 or 200
Exactly.
cases, we can shut the state down like in Melbourne. But we are getting 100,000, 200,000
My goodness.
per
Yeah.
day. Yeah. So yeah, but we are going in the right path. The vaccination has increased, and hopefully the situation will be good.
Hopefully. Thoughts with you guys, and hopefully it improves.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
Okay,
Gaurav.
so moving on from cricket. Okay, so basically our discussion is totally about cricket Australia right now. So I want to ask you how good Australia is playing right now, and what are the advantages you are seeing moving ahead for cricket Australia?
To be honest, I wish we were playing right now. The
Yeah.
talk has been a lot about sandpaper again the last couple of weeks, and
Obviously.
we've been dealing with that with Cameron Bancroft and everything. But if we go back to the Test series against India, of course, as an Australian fan, was extremely disappointed with the loss. Was very disappointed with the defeat
Exactly.
and the way we batted from an Australian perspective. After what happened in the Adelaide Test, Australia had a great chance to really drive home the advantage in that series, and then we batted very poorly in Melbourne and let India back in the series. And India, to their credit, very, very fantastic series win. For Australia going forward, I think, of course, our pace bowling, even though we couldn't get the job done against India, the depth we have in our pace bowling is very, very encouraging. The worry I have is our opening batting and also that number 5 position. We're relying too much on Steve Smith and Marnus Labuschagne with the batting. We need others to step up as well. So, not a lot of Test cricket for Australia before the Ashes. I think we're only got a test against Afghanistan, so that's going to be a test for Australia to perform well straight away in the Ashes. We've also got questions to answer in T20 cricket as well regarding our middle order batting. So, from an Australian perspective, there's a lot of questions we need to answer and get right.
Okay, you want to ask something, cricket guy?
Yeah, Charles, whatever we have seen from Australia in the late 90s and 2000, it has been an extraordinary batting performance, and it was a team of invincibles. But what happened post 2010 after Mike Hussey, Justin Langer, Matthew Hayden? Why did Australia didn't didn't do properly in that transition phase? What happened to that Australian golden generation? Because now I see people averaging 35, 40,
Yep.
getting into this Australian
40.
team, while Brad
Great
Hodge,
point.
he played 6 test matches and at an average of 52, he didn't get go for a longer period. What has happened in Australian cricket?
That is a brilliant point, and I wish I had the answer. I wish I don't think there's any one answer to this. I think it's a combination of a lot of things. But you make a great point. There's other players in addition to Brad Hodge, like Stuart Law, and even look at Stuart McGill from a leg spin perspective. Who's stuck behind Warren. We had all these players coming through. I think what it was, we had a really strong domestic structure in that period where the competition was so strong that players were performing and still couldn't get into that great Australian team. I think in the last decade, I don't think our domestic competition is as strong as what it used to be. And also, domestic cricket, especially the Sheffield Shield, has taken a backseat to the Big Bash. We've looked at the last 10 years, it's been the Big Bash that has taken over the majority of the Australian summer. So players are not focused on red ball cricket as they were 15, 20, 25 years ago. And that's been a big reason why Australia are not as strong in Test cricket, in my opinion. A lot of white ball focus. They're not doing enough red ball batting, and that's showing in. I think it's disappointing that we didn't get more great players. We've had some good players come through the last 10 years, but not great players in terms of comparing to the golden generation. So I think it's a big challenge for Cricket Australia now to know their Test cricket strategy so we can produce great players going forward again.
Yeah.
Okay, my next question to you, Ki, what is the main reason behind 2 back-to-back series losses against India in Australia? What was the main reason?
Yeah, the first one, we had the excuse. There was no Steve Smith. There was no David Warner. That's what everyone said. We didn't have these guys. And then India performed very well back in 2018. This one was a big shock because we had those players there. We had a full side, and India had a lot of injuries. And we knocked India over for 36 in Adelaide. We had everything in our favour in that series. I think the big reason why we lost was, I think, our batting wasn't up to scratch. You look at Melbourne, we got bowled cheaply when we had the series there 1-0 up. We had the chance to really drive home the advantage, as I mentioned earlier. We got bowled out for under 200. In Sydney, we couldn't get those last wickets on the last day. We didn't have enough penetration when it mattered in the final innings, and it was the same in Brisbane. So you couple that, too much reliance on Steve Smith and Marnus Labuschagne with the bat. Mitchell Starc struggled with the ball. Too much reliance on Pat Cummins and Josh Hazel with the ball, and Nathan Lyon wasn't able to get the wickets as well. So it's a combination of things. I think Tim Payne also didn't have a great series as captain. I think he let the pressure get to him a little bit. But at the same time, full credit to India. They were outstanding in that series. And it was a great series, but it's those things that cost Australia, I reckon.
Okay, one more question regarding that. Everyone talks about that Australian batting let them down. I think bowlers also let them down in that series. Mitchell Starc didn't bowl that properly. Josh Hazelwood was on and off, and probably Pat Cummins was the only guy who was bowling really well in that series.
100% agree. There was too much reliance on Pat Cummins as well. You go back to the Gabba test. I think he bowled the most overs by an Australian pacer on day 5 of a test, I think since 2006. I read a stat somewhere. So big reliance on Pat Cummins because Mitchell Starc wasn't able to be effective. And Nathan Lyon wasn't getting the wickets as well. And Cameron Green, the new all-rounder, wasn't able to get wickets as well. So that was a big problem for Australia. That was probably a big disappointment as well. We know that our batting isn't particularly strong. We know our batting relies a lot on Steve Smith and Marnus. But the bowling couldn't get the job done in Sydney and in Brisbane when we had very good chances there in the 4th innings to win the tests. So there'll be a lot of homework done, I think, in the off-season to see why that was the case and perhaps who can come into the test side. Someone like James Pattinson or Michael Neser come into the bowling attack to freshen things up perhaps, but we'll see what happens going forward. But yeah, that was disappointing.
Yeah.
Krida, you want to ask something?
Yeah, Charles, if I look as an Indian fan, when we look at Australia, we look at the pitches. In the last 10 years, the pitches have also changed. The drop in wickets hasn't helped Australia as it has helped the touring sides. And that intimidation factor at Gabba, Sydney, Adelaide has gone. I think it has been neutralized because of the multi-purpose stadium and AFL and the cricket going on and the
Yes.
soccer as well. So, do you think that is another reason that Australians don't intimidate the touring teams, right? For example, in Gabba or in Sydney, as they used to do in 1990s and early 2000?
Brilliant point about the pitches. I think that's going back to your earlier question. I think that's another reason why we're not producing great batsmen. We're getting a lot of drop-in pitches and not a lot of variety across the stadiums that we used to. I don't know if that completely neutralizes things. I think it depends who we play. I think, teams like South Africa and India, they're the two sides that have had success here, and that's because they've got good pace bowling attacks, and they've really challenged us with that. I think teams like England, New Zealand, and these teams that are meant to do well here have struggled here because they haven't been able to adjust as well. So I still think Australia have got the advantage against sides that can't quite adjust well here. But teams that have got the skill and the pace attack can come here and do well. So I agree with you on that point. And I think Australia got to figure out what the home advantage is, because we're getting a lot of pitches now that are quite flat. And I thought Sydney against India was very slow and flat. And, it wasn't the case 10, 15, 20 years ago where, every ground in Australia had something special about it. Now it's all about the drop-in pitches and things like that. So I hope that, the Ashes this year, we get a little bit more variety in the surfaces and we can really get England in that way, because they often struggle with the Kookaburra ball here. So that's where an advantage can be had for Australia.
And Charles, do you think going away from the Waka and going to the Optus Stadium helps Australian team, or it's a disadvantage?
Well, it depends on the pitch, to be honest. Depends, I don't know if the pitch will be, it's a drop-in surface compared to the Waka. If it has the pace and the bounce that the Waka does have, that can be an advantage. In the test in the Optus Stadium in 2018 against India, Australia won that game. There was a lot in that surface, plenty of bounce, plenty of pace. So I'm hoping that, Perth, even though it's at a different stadium, it holds that we know Perth for the bounce, and hopefully that continues.
Yeah.
I think we've lost Gaurav.
Yeah, so it's fine. So when I was just researching about Australia, I also found out a thing, like you talked about BBL. In my opinion, the standard and the quality of BBL has gone down when you have increased the matches. When you've increased the
100%.
matches, the viewership has also decreased. So do you think it's a right move made by Cricket Australia, or they should go back to the previous editions of BBL where they had less matches and much more of entertainment?
I said at the time when they increased the season to a home and away season that it was the wrong move. And I stand by that, because if you want to have the IPL model here in Australia, I think it's impossible. First of all, the IPL is conducted, international cricket is not conducted there. So you get the best players around the world playing IPL. Yeah. Second of all, the talent pool in India is significantly greater than the talent pool in Australia. It's fact. Yeah. So you've got a lot of, the Indian players coming through in the IPL are fantastic, because they're players that are, some of the best in their states. So they're coming straight into the IPL. The cricket in Australia doesn't have the talent pool, and it's in the middle of the Australian season. Yeah. The BBL was at its peak. The BBL was at its peak when every side played each other once, and it was a short season across about 4 or 5 weeks. And that allowed the Sheffield Shield as well to be played properly. But now it's just too long.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to the next question. My question is, what is the future of Team Payne captaincy? For how long he gonna lead?
I think he'll lead in the Ashes. Justin Langer said it on a podcast recently that it's going to be Tim Payne. I have a feeling the Ashes might be his last series, especially if Australia loses. I think it'll be his last series. But even if they win, because he's 36 now, I think. So it might be his last series. He might go out, hopefully, on a winning note. And then, Australia will have to appoint a new captain then. I think that's when it will happen.
Okay, then who should be the captain after Team Payne once exit?
Yeah, that's the $1 million
question, isn't it? It's the $1 million question. Should it be Steve Smith? I think the decision has to be what's best for the team now going forward. Forget what's happened in the past. Steve Smith made a very big mistake in Cape Town. We know that. It was terrible what happened there. But he's done his time. He served a very big punishment. He served 1 year out of the game. And he was escorted by police in South Africa.
Yeah, exactly.
He copped a big punishment. And yes, he made a big mistake. And yes, people won't agree with it. But I think he's the best person to lead the side now. I think if you put Pat Cummins as captain, it might be a little bit too much for him. Steve Smith's got the experience, and I think he's probably the safest bet.
Yeah, cricket guy, go ahead.
Charles, whatever I've seen of Australia, the Australian community also plays a big role in terms of the association of the cricket team. So do you think there should be a man appointed whom the Australian community trusts, the Australian public trust, rather than going for performance? Can they choose someone who has a different skill, maybe like someone who is a youngster who can take this team forward, like the Graham Smith that the South Africa appointed in the early 2000. So do you think as I've seen, as I've read, Australian captain is the second most important person in Australia apart from the Prime Minister?
Correct. I think that's what Australia wanted from Travis Head. They looked at him as a possible leader because he has captained South Australia, he captains the Adelaide Strikers, but he hasn't locked down his place in the Test team.
Exactly.
That's a serious problem. You can go for a youngster, but they've got to be able to do the job, and they've got to be able, they've got to be a set player in the team, first and foremost. Yeah. And when you look at the batting, it's only Smith, Marnus, and David Warner that are the set three, and David Warner's obviously not going to be in the running for captain. So Marnus hasn't had experience before, but Steve Smith has. If you don't go with a batsman, then you probably got to go with someone like Pat Cummins, but then you risk, we saw the reliance on him in the India series. If you're going to burden him with the captaincy as well, that's a lot for him that's a lot to ask for from him. I'm happy for a youngster to get the captaincy, but he's got to be performing in the team.
Can it be?
Marnus Labuschagne could be an option.
Yeah, Marnus Labuschagne
He could, but I don't think he's got a lot of a captaincy experience. You got to see what his leadership experience is like and what his capabilities are. I don't know. I don't exactly know what his capabilities are from a leadership perspective, because it's more than, you've got to have the tactical ability to be able to make decisions quickly on the field, and you've got to be able to lead your team well in difficult times, because Australia going to be touring Asia next year. They're going to be going to India. You need a good captain there. You need a captain that's going to be performing well and it has a clean mind. So I think if you put Marnus in, you're going to be taking a risk, even though it could work. But I'm not particularly sure of his leadership capability. So Australia got to be sure about that decision.
Charles, can you bring in, it's a left field selection, can you bring in Alex Carey? Whatever I see of Alex Carey, it's a very good captain. I've seen him leading the Adelaide Strikers. Do you think he is kind of a captaincy material?
For the Australian Test side, that's a big, big jump. And I don't think he's reached his potential in red ball cricket. I look at Alex Carey as a player who looks good, but can do more, especially with the bat. He tends to give his wicket away that I see. If you're going to put him into the Test side, I'd let him settle in first before throwing him with the captaincy. It's you got to look at what's best for the team and what's best for the player as well. You're going to hinder that player by giving them the captaincy. That's going to hurt the team. So big decisions for Australia to make. If I had to say who it would be, I think it would be Smith. Australia will go with the safe option. It's a big year next year. I don't think they want to take too many risks.
Okay. Is this the end of a road for a player like Usman Khawaja and Shaun Marsh?
I think it is for Shaun Marsh. I'm very disappointed Usman Khawaja didn't get picked for Australia in the India series. I was of the opinion he had to be there, and he should have opened. He's had success for Australia before when he opened the batting. We remember his innings against Pakistan in the UAE in 2018. He would have been, and he's got a great record in Australia in Test cricket. We were struggling. We had Joe Burns, who was way out of form. And then, David Warner was out injured. It would have been the perfect opportunity to bring, and Marcus Harris is not cutting it at Test level. It would have been a great opportunity to bring in Khawaja. I think he's got problems with the management there, though. So I hope it's not the end of him. He had a great season for Queensland in the Sheffield Shield. He captained the side to victory. So we'll talk about captain. Usman Khawaja, captain Queensland to a Sheffield Shield win last season. So I hope it's not the end of the road for him because I think he has something to offer, especially at home. But I think Sean Marsh, no more.
Charles, whatever assist of Sean Marsh and Usman Khawaja, I think Usman Khawaja is a kind of a lackadaisical character, very, I think, very free-spirited cricketer. And Sean Marsh is not a leader; he's a follower. Because in 2018, he couldn't take Australia home in any of the circumstances or in any of the scenarios. Do you think these two players are the same?
Sean Marsh, I think he's had his chances in Test cricket. Great domestic player. He's dominated Shield cricket, but he hasn't quite been able to cut it at Test level. He's sort of like too good for Sheffield Shield, but not quite good enough to cut it at Test level. So I don't think they'll bring him back to the side again. They've given him enough opportunities, and I think he's mid-30s now, even more than that perhaps. So he's had his chances. Usman Khawaja is an interesting one. You look at Justin Langer; he's a very intense character, very intense. Usman Khawaja is very much different. And Usman Khawaja is also that kind of guy who will call out Justin Langer if he doesn't agree with something. And we saw that in the Test documentary. So I don't know exactly what the relationship is between Khawaja and Langer. And that's why maybe Khawaja's not in the team. But as I said before, he's got ability. He's got a good record in Australia. We missed the trick not picking him here. So hopefully there's, Australia's our opening position is a real worry for us. So maybe the selectors might, have some sense this season and pick him as opener for the Ashes, because I think that'll be a good move.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, moving on to the next question, and this is the serious topic of a sandpaper gate. Okay, don't you think Cricket Australia was too harsh on David Warner, Cameron Bancroft, and Steve Smith on the sandpaper gate?
Yeah, I think the penalties they got were massive, and I felt at the time 1 year is maybe too excessive, because I think what it was a couple of things. It was a build-up of the culture in the Australian team before that. The investigation found that it was a lot of bullying, and it wasn't a very good culture. And of course, the community outrage here in Australia in particular. Everyone was going crazy, myself included. It was a terrible look. And Cricket Australia had a lot of work to do in trying to improve the reputation, or try save its reputation. So it took a very, very big stance in suspending those guys for a very long time. I thought at the time it was a lot, but what it does do, I guess, it's going to deter someone else from doing it in the future. They'll know if they try to do something like that, they're in for a big punishment. So, my opinion is they've done their time, and we can look forward now. We don't want to keep looking back at it.
Just a minute, Cricketer, you can go ahead. Just tell my viewers, just wait for a little moment. We'll take all the questions once our interview, all the questions get over.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take all the questions from your sides. Okay, Cricketer, go ahead.
Jal, what I've seen of Australian media, and in the going back to 2018, if I take back to 2018, I saw Australia as a character who thought that they're invincibles. Whatever they do, they will get away. And do you think it is because of the past legacy they have, and they thought that they're bigger than the game, perhaps, maybe bringing an outside substance and doing it on the camera with 40 cameras? Do you think it's a naive kind of a scenario?
Definitely. To have a sandpaper and think you can hide it, definitely naive. I think it's always been the Australian way that we play hard and that we try to intimidate our opponents. But I just feel it sort of got in the way of doing things the right way, in a sense. There's nothing wrong with playing hard. There's nothing wrong with playing hard. But you got to play fair. And I think what really annoyed me, in the lead up to the Cape Town incident was, the Australian team would be very happy to dish it out to the opposition. Yeah. We would dish it out and we would really go hard at our opponents. But then when we would get it in return, we'd almost cry victim. We'd always say, "Oh, don't do that to us. You can't do that. You're crossing the line." But we would do the same. I think I feel there's always a place for sledging in cricket. There's always a place to try get into the minds of the opponents, but you don't want to make it personal. You want to keep it cricket related. So I think, in a sense, Australia did think they were a little bit invincible, and they tried to, go with any means possible to try and win. But I think since sandpaper, I think they've still played hard cricket, but you've got to do it in the spirit of the game, I feel.
That's a great answer. Yeah.
Okay. Any prediction for Ashes?
Yeah, it should be a good one. I think there's still a lot of variables from now until then. One being the availability of Jofra Archer for England.
Yeah.
He's going to be crucial for them. If he's not here, I think it's going to be very hard for England to win here. I've got Australia as favourites. I think we'll do it, hopefully.
Yeah.
But in terms of a set prediction, I think I'll know more closer to the date. Depending on the availability of our players, hopefully all of our players are fit, because there's a lot of cricket to be played before then, especially white ball stuff. And then we've got to see how England go against India and New Zealand in their summer too. So, but as I said, I think it's the availability of Jofra Archer, the form of Joe Root. Those two are going to be crucial. So we'll find out more soon.
Yeah. So,
Really, you want to ask something?
How do you see the preparation of the Australian team before the Ashes, and what is the public reaction? Is this Ashes really what it is? Is it really celebrated in Australia during this COVID time, or they're just thinking of Ashes, just a cricket tournament during this pandemic time, especially? How do you see the Ashes tournament? Is it a kind of festival, or is just a kind of a thing just to get this thing get over?
Yeah. I'll answer your first question. In terms of the preparation of the Australian team for Test cricket, it's hard. We've got a lot of white ball cricket. There's going to be IPL, but I don't know about the availability of the Australian players there. We've got tours of the West Indies, which is a white ball tour. We've got tour of Bangladesh, which is a white ball tour. Then we've got the World Cup, the T20 World Cup. And then we've only got one test against Afghanistan, and I don't know how much Sheffield Shield cricket the players will get as well before the Ashes, because they've got to do maybe some quarantining. They're going to be in bubbles. You've got to rotate them. You've got to take care of them. So we've only got one red ball game potentially for a lot of these test cricketers, and that's against Afghanistan. So preparation for the Ashes is not going to be ideal. In terms of the Ashes here in Australia, it's huge. It's still the biggest rivalry for us. Australia versus England. Australia versus India is a massive rivalry, and we were all very disappointed as Australia fans to lose last season. Yeah. But the Ashes, that's the big one. If we retain that, that's just fantastic for an Australian cricket fan. We don't want to lose to England, and we want to make sure that we hold that urn. It's very important to us. It's still the pinnacle.
Okay, moving on to the white ball format. I think we are done with the red ball cricket. So moving on to the white ball format. What are the chances of Australia in coming 3 ICC tournament? Because there will be two T20 World Cup and one 50-over World Cup in 2023. So what are the chances you are looking?
For the upcoming World Cup, I'm not particularly sure of our chances. I think there's a few teams ahead of us. I think India and England are the two leading contenders. I would even throw the West Indies in there. They're a very, very good T20 team when they've got their full side together. I think Australia in T20 cricket, we've still got a lot of questions we haven't answered. It's our middle order. We've got a lot of top order players, and we're trying to fit them into the middle order. We're not picking a lot of middle order specialists. And I don't know if we have a lot of middle order specialists in Australia. So that's why in the West Indies tour, I was hoping that someone like Josh Inglis would get picked, or someone like Ben McDermott. Exactly. It didn't happen. Or even someone like Dan Christian. I know he's getting on with age, but he had a great BBL, and he can come in the late order. He's a late order specialist. We've got players like Marcus Stoinis, who he's predominantly a top order player in T20 cricket, the same as Mitchell Marsh, the same as Alex Carey. They're all top order players. We're trying to fit them into the middle. Also, our death bowling is a concern. We haven't quite nailed that. I think if we have Mitchell Starc fit and firing, that'll really help us. But we need to answer those two questions, because we can't rely too much on our top order all the time. And we can't, we need to finish the innings well. And, we need to make sure our death bowling and our death batting is good enough. But I think from our chances this tournament, I don't think we'll win it.
Yeah.
Okay. Cricket, you want to ask something?
Yeah, Charles, I watch a lot of BBL, and the
Hmm.
talent pool I have seen in BBL, I think it's incredible because a lot of fast bowling all rounders, there are a lot of quicks, rapid, and a lot of hard hitting batsmen. But what has happened, I mean, when it comes to international cricket and when it comes to T20 internationals, Australia have not put, have not get the act together. What has been the main worry for Australia? Because a lot of people, if you ask in India, they really rate these T20 stars, and that's why they get the big bucks when
Mm.
it comes to the IPL,
Yep.
like Jai Richardson and yeah, different players, Ben Cutting.
Yep. I think it's a couple of things. I think we were talking earlier about the quality, the overall quality of the BBL. I think that's diminished. I think that's been, it's not as strong as what it was because of the long nature of the season and because of the lack of availability of the big names. So the players in the BBL are not always testing themselves against the top quality players. And then when they go to international cricket, it's a different game. And they probably struggle a little bit in terms of adjusting to that.
Yeah.
Another key reason is Australia has always prioritised Test cricket as opposed to T20 international cricket. We've always picked stronger teams with an eye to Test cricket. We haven't really focused on really strong teams for T20s. And I'll give you an example. We picked, before the tour of South Africa was postponed, you know how we had the New Zealand tour, which was the T20s, and we had the South Africa Test tour. They were both going to be happening at the same time. We picked the
Yes.
full strength side to go to South Africa for the tests.
Yeah. Yeah.
We didn't pick a full strength side to go to
Exactly.
New Zealand for the T20s because
Yeah.
even with a T20 World Cup later in the year, we still thought the
Yeah.
tests were more important. That's just how it is here. We love Test cricket. We still see Test cricket as more important. We haven't really focused on playing full strength sides in T20 cricket. So we haven't really settled on combinations. And again, we haven't really quite nailed down middle order positions, death bowling. And, we need to see more players coming up from the Big Bash and then nailing their spots in the T20 international side after that.
Charles, do you think Steve Smith deserves a spot in the T20 team in the
Yeah,
current
yeah.
setup?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
he's handy in T20 cricket. You look at someone like Joe Root from England, he can't get into that side, but he's a good T20 player. I think Steve Smith doesn't always get the credit he deserves in T20s. You look at the back end of 2019, he was hitting the ball beautifully in T20 cricket. I think what he's got to focus on is just playing beautiful cricket shots. Sometimes when he tries to slog the ball, it doesn't look good and he gets himself out. He can score quickly. We saw in the ODIs against India last year, he scored those 60 ball hundreds.
yeah,
He
yeah.
didn't do anything out of
Hundreds,
the
yeah.
ordinary. It was beautiful cricket shots. He's got a role to play, I think, for Australian T20s, especially if we lose an early wicket.
Okay. So, and talking about Steve Smith, do you think he's a kind of a horses for courses player? If this is low and
Yes.
slow, Steve Smith will get a chance. If it's a flat
Yes.
track, then you can give Ben McDermott a go, or another number four better than Steve Smith.
Yeah, definitely. I think also in the game itself, you list Steve Smith at number 3, but then if the openers get a great start, you don't have to send in Smith at 3. You can send in someone like a Glenn Maxwell after the openers make a great start, something like that. Just be flexible with him because if you lose an early wicket,
Yeah.
Steve Smith's a good option, I think, in all conditions to
Yeah.
come in and just steady the ship and keep the scoreboard ticking and set up a platform. Because I think with our middle order not being perfect, you need to have a platform there, and that's where Steve Smith really plays an important role.
Yeah, that is the next question. Why everyone questions Steve Smith place in T20 cricket?
Yeah. We're just saying that. Yeah, he can play it. It's just that there's the idea that he's a red ball specialist, and of course he's a fantastic red ball cricketer. We know that.
Yeah.
But he can score quickly. But it's just his sometimes his tendency to try slog the ball, and that's what gets himself into trouble. If he focuses on playing good cricket shots, he can score quickly.
But Charles, do you think Steve Smith was a better T20 player in 2011, 2012 when he was playing the IPL than now? Because I've seen Virat Kohli and Kane Williamson, they've elevated their game. Kane Williamson was not a proper T20 player, but he is playing incredible in this format of the game. And
Yeah.
Virat Kohli has taken the level. But Joe Root and Steve Smith are better T20 players in the past than now.
Potentially, I think Steve Smith's rise in red ball and how well he's gone there has maybe resulted in less focus on his white ball. Because I agree, he's not as good in white ball as he is in red ball.
Yeah.
It's clear. But I think he has a role to offer. But I think he's just got to focus, as I mentioned earlier, on focusing on his strengths, not going too far away from what works for him in Test cricket, and in implying that into his in his white ball batting as well, because he can score quickly on his day.
So, okay, moving on to the next segment, that is question answer session from fans. The
Cool.
question is, if India beat England in England, then chances of England's Ashes win will be zero. What's your take on that?
Potentially, I think. Look, there's always different circumstances. One of them being the conditions. We saw India beat Australia here. So does that mean Australia no chance in the Ashes? So India are a great team. I think it depends on, as I said before, the availability of Jofra Archer. I think if England lose to India, there's no doubt it'll hurt their confidence. But it's a new series, those Ashes, and it's a different mindset and it's a different condition. So I wouldn't say their chances are zero, but I think their confidence will take a hit. And there'll be a lot more scrutiny on the performances of certain players if they don't perform.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Bimal has asked to you, Stark and Lloyd disappointed Australia, so that's why they lost.
Yes, agree. I was mentioning earlier that, Stark was not swinging the ball, and didn't have the same threat that he usually has. And the worrying stat for Mitchell Stark is, as the series goes on, his averages get worse. So his averages in the first test of a series is very good, but then as the series goes on, it gets worse. So that's going to be something Australia have to consider for the Ashes, because that's a 5-test match series. And Nathan Lyon, I felt he bowled too straight to the right-handers, in my opinion. He didn't bowl wide enough. He bowled a very straight line that was very easy to play against. And of course, there were a few catches dropped off his bowling, a few chances missed off his bowling as well that didn't help. But I just feel that the bowling wasn't attacking enough from Gaz, especially to the right-handers. Bowling a little bit wider, you can try to get that ball to spin back into, between the gate of the right-hander. Or if the ball goes straight on, you can bring the slip into play. But he just bowled too straight, and it was easy pickings for the Indian batsmen. So there's going to be a big focus on Stark and Lyon for the Ashes later in the year. So if we can get those two players performing, then it's happy days.
Charles, when I think of when I was searching about Lyon, I found he's in the late he's 38 or 39. So do you think he is the answer that Australia needs? Because I thought he will retire after the India series, because the way he bowled in the Gabba against Rishabh Pant, he was devastated after the game. Do you think he's the answer? And what are the Australian spin bowling contingent you think will serve Australia for next 10 to 12? Is it Mitch Swepson? Is it Tanveer Sharma? Or who is the answer?
I don't know if Nathan Lyon is that old. I think he's 33, 34. So, but to your point, you make a great point about Australia needing a contingency plan after Lyon, because it took us a while to find a worthy replacement after Shane Warne retired, and we don't want the same. We don't want the same situation. I think leading the way is Mitch Swepson. He performed the best in Shield out of the spinners. But again, I think we just need more red ball cricket and more red ball focus in Australia, rather than the Big Bash taking up a significant part of the calendar, because then you allow these spinners to get into a rhythm, and then you can see who's performing, and you give them more of a chance to bowl in red ball cricket. But I think it's Swepson. I think it's Swepson right now. Yeah.
Okay, next question is, I think we are overhyping West Indies because of 2016, but I really don't think so. They have literally any chance against Australia. What are the chances of Australia in West Indies? The question is this, from Bimal Sharma.
I think West Indies, even if they lose against Australia, they're a chance for the World Cup. You cannot write the West Indies off. You look at the depth in their full-strength team. You've got someone like Fabian Allen who can tonk a ball. He's batting at number 9. You got Coram Pollard in the middle order there. Andre Russell's back. Nicholas Pooran at his best can send a ball miles. He hit the most sixes in last year's IPL. It's incredible depth. It's such a dangerous side that can get you from anywhere. You've got to be careful against the West Indies. You cannot take your eye off them, because they'll make you pay. Perhaps their bowling is a concern in terms of they can leak runs, but they're going to be able to score big totals. So watch out for them. I would not write them off at all. And Australia, they're going to have to be on their game to beat them. I think it'll be a good series.
Yeah. So, Gaurav?
Okay, so what's your prediction for West Indies tour?
Oh, good question. It's 5 matches, 5-match T20 series.
Yeah.
I'll go with my heart, and I'll say we can do it. I'll go 3-2 Australia. Hopefully I'm right. But we'll see what happens.
So you can't take lightly from West Indies because they are too good a side in T20 cricket.
Yeah.
Of course. They've got great players, big hitters, power players right throughout their lineup. So you're going to have to be on your game.
Okay, one of the question is why Mitchell Marsh is not continuing playing these days. I think he was injured, right?
Yeah, he had an injury and he's still in the T20 setup. Yeah. He was there in New Zealand. He's still in our T20 side. So, the selectors continue to show their faith in him, and fingers crossed he can repay that with more consistent performances. They keep holding out and saying that Mitchell Marsh is going to come good, but we need him to come good very quickly because there's some big series and big tournament coming up.
And what went wrong with James Faulkner?
I don't know. That's a great question.
Oh my God, yeah.
That's a great question. I don't know. He's just fallen off the face of the earth because mid-2010s, he was a very, very good all-rounder. He won games for Australia from impossible positions, and he was man of the match in the World Cup final.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know what's happened to him. I wish I had an answer. I think only he might be able to answer that.
And do you think Mitchell Marsh was kind of a talent that Australia missed out on? Because I've seen Mitchell Marsh being invested so much in the Test cricket, but he has not come off good. And I think in 2016 he was one of the leading Australian all-rounders when it came to when he was playing against India, and he was hitting sixes for fun. I still remember that Adelaide Test match. But do you think he's just fallen off the radar due to injuries?
No, it's not due to injuries. I think he just hasn't been able to deliver consistently. It's just as simple as that. He's had his chances. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out the way Australia wanted it to. He's had, we all know his ability. He can produce some excellent performances on his day, but it's just consistency. He has not been able to do it enough.
Okay. Let's take more questions from.
So I think Gaurav, we have a question.
Do you feel that New Zealand has a greater chance in the World Test Championship final, as the condition in England are very similar to what New Zealand is, and New Zealand are playing 2 tests also in England before the final?
I think that's a big advantage, and New Zealand need to be using that to their advantage. To get those couple of matches in England before a massive game like the World Test Championship final definitely is very, very, very handy. So I'll be interested to see how New Zealand perform in these couple of Test matches against England, and I back New Zealand to be competitive in that World Test Championship final because New Zealand is a team you can never write off. They'll always be there and thereabouts, challenging. So India are going to they're going to have to be on their game in that final. Because New Zealand have got those couple of Test matches under their belt, and it's important for New Zealand to take that advantage and use it.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Is internal politics is the main reason behind Australian cricket downfall?
Well, maybe it's played a factor. There has been problems in Australian cricket in the boardroom in recent years. I think as well... I think it's also the declining quality of the domestic cricket as well. It's not as strong as what it was. That plays a factor. I think there's been a big focus for Cricket Australia in chasing the big dollars, the big TV deals, focusing on the big series in like the Ashes in India. So, and the BBL as well. That played a big part in the TV revenue. So it's really affected our domestic game. I think our domestic game is not as strong as what it used to be, and I think that's what the main, worry has been for Australia in terms of their downfall. You look at other countries where internal politics has really played a factor. I don't think Australia is at that level, but I think our domestic game has got to improve.
Gaurav, I just wanted to ask.
Okay, Yeah, go ahead.
Gaurav, yeah,
Cricket
I
guy.
have a question. Charles, during the pandemic, when the COVID hit Australia and all over the world in April May, there was a
Yep.
statement from Cricket Australia that we are bankrupt. We need to play India to get the revenue. But
Yeah.
my question to you, if you give the statement before that, you have been playing series with India, England, with the big teams, with the World Cup, and
Great
you are
question.
also getting BBL money. My question is, can you get bankrupt during the COVID just because the COVID hit Australia? Is that a kind of, I would say, a hogwash from the real downfall of Australian cricket?
It could be a hogwash, but it could also be, what that screams. It screams maybe mismanagement of funds before the pandemic. What are you spending the money on? It was similar to rugby league here in Australia. It's a sport
Yeah.
where they said, oh, if we don't play the game, if we don't start again in 2 months, the game will be gone.
Yeah.
What are you doing with the money? And that's a question potentially, what are Australia doing with the money? Australia is a team that needs the big series to generate that big revenue, but you're generating massive revenue. You've got a massive TV deal, over $1 billion. What are you doing with the funds? I think they need to review what they're doing with their funds and make sure that there's enough for a rainy day, that you're not relying on a series to keep yourself alive. So,
Yep.
very important for Australia to look at that going forward.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, should we take more questions? I think
Yeah. Yeah.
one more question we can take from Yakshit is: do you force Australian players playing in IPL Phase 2 in September, October?
Good question. I think I read yesterday that the CEO, Nick Hockley, he said that there hasn't been any discussion of that yet, because the Australian players just got out of quarantine yesterday. So I think it might be difficult actually to see Australian players in the IPL, because I was reading that the likes of David Warner and Pat Cummins, they're thinking of taking a rest from West Indies and Bangladesh. And I don't know if it's a very good look if they're playing in the IPL after taking rest from international duty. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one. I think it might be difficult.
Okay, I
John, do
think
you think that
yeah, go ahead,
Australian
Cricket
top
guy.
players are more inclined to the amount that they're being offered by the IPL? Because I have read statements of Michael Clark saying that I don't think Steve Smith will go for the IPL just before the IPL because
Yeah,
he had been sold for 2 crore rupees.
yeah.
So I don't think he should go to India and play for 2 to 3 months. And during this COVID situation, do you think the Australian price tag, the top players, what they're being offered, that matters in their participation?
Oh, yeah, it does. Someone like Pat Cummins, I don't think you'd want to miss the IPL.
Yeah, yeah,
Someone like Kane Richardson as well. They go for big money, and it's, you go for 6 weeks and you earn a massive amount. I think it wouldn't be the best look if Australia players, that the greatest pride is playing for your country, and we shouldn't lose that. We shouldn't lose that. I think Australian players are well paid by the board as well. So I think Cricket Australia have got to step in here and think they've got to look at the welfare of the player and the series coming up after the IPL. We've got a World Cup and you've got an Ashes. You don't want your players burnt out because of too much time in the bubble around the world by the time those big series come. So it could be this year that they say no IPL this time around, but we'll see what happens.
Okay, the last question from today's interview, the Samar Desai has asked, what will be the impact in World Test Championship final if New Zealand loses England series?
I think it depends how they lose. If they get smashed in both tests, that might, reduce the confidence a little bit, and that might just get some doubts in their minds. Say they lose 1-0 or 2-0, but they were both closely fought test matches. I think New Zealand is the kind of team that they'll take their learnings from that series if they lose and try improve in the World Test Championship final. That's the advantage of playing those two tests. If they make mistakes there, you can try to rectify those in the World Test Championship final. So I think it's the manner in which they perform. And if they perform very poorly and they get hammered, then that might be a confidence. That might hurt their confidence. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Charles, do you think the Australian talent pool in the future generation, coming generation, do you think it lies in this Asian origin cricketers that
Yeah, it could be.
like currently? Yeah, because we have seen the clips of
Yeah.
Suraj Randeep like riding buses, and we have also seen Tanvir Shanga, an inspirational story. Do you think that subcontinent players or maybe Asian origin cricketers leading
Yeah.
Australia cricket forward?
Potentially, look, we're seeing a lot more of Asian-based cricketers here in Australia. There's the likes of Jason Sangha here as well. There's a big raps on him. Yeah, absolutely. I see more of that coming through. But yeah, I think it comes to still you've got to make sure your pathways are strong and that you're developing your players here in Australia very well so that they're ready to go when they come to international cricket and even state cricket. So that they're performing well and they're ready to go for the big matches in international cricket. Because, at the moment, our batting stocks look a little thin, if I'm being honest. So we need players putting their hand up, coming through the ranks. And it could be those Asian-born players. We're seeing more of those. So we have to wait and see.
Yes.
Okay, I think we should conduct the show now. I hope you have liked the show. We have conducted very improvely through the questions. Okay, we have given proper questions to you. Okay, I hope you have find better in the show.
It was awesome. Thank you for having me.
Cricket guy, you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Charles, for giving us time, your important time, and it was really great talking to you and getting that real analysis what is happening in Australian cricket, and I wish that in future episode we can host you, and I hope you will come to us too again.
No worries at all. We might have you on the Crick Blog podcast as well.
Okay,
we'd love to have you.
Yeah, you can.
Thank you so much.
Please. Okay, please, you need to be available once Australia and West Indies series are going on. Okay.
I'll do my best. No worries.
Okay, good night.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the time. It was lovely chatting with you. So we conduct the show here right now. So आज के लिए इतना ही रहने देते हैं. वीडियो पसंद आए तो चैनल को लाइक करें, सब्सक्राइब करें, बेल आइकन को भी जरूर दबाएं और तब तक के लिए शुभ रात्रि, शुभ रात्रि, शुभ रात्रि.